Imagine standing in a crowded room, filled with laughter, chatter, and the endless performance of social masks, yet feeling that peculiar emptiness, that gnawing awareness that no amount of small talk or human closeness can touch the deeper chambers of your being. Now imagine stepping outside, alone into the night. The silence greets you like an old companion. The air is sharp, the streets empty, and in that vast stillness you suddenly feel something different. Not loneliness, but clarity. It is in this unsettling quiet where certain minds discover a power that frightens others. The terrifying intelligence of those who choose to be alone. We are conditioned from birth to believe that human connection is the pinnacle of fulfillment. Family, friendship, romance, the crowd, the collective. Society teaches us these are the essential ingredients of a meaningful life. Yet, what if the greatest minds, the sharpest thinkers, the most awakened individuals, do not find their strength in endless companionship, but in deliberate isolation? What if the act of withdrawing from the world is not an act of weakness, but one of supreme inner command? The paradox is disturbing. Humans are social creatures. Evolution has sculpted us to rely on the tribe. Our ancestors survived not by wandering into the forest alone, but by banding together for protection. And yet, throughout history, some of the most profound thinkers, artists, and visionaries have chosen the opposite path. They walked away from the crowd, away from the noise, into the terrifying silence of solitude. And in that silence, they uncovered truths that remain hidden from those who cannot bear to be alone. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher whose pessimistic brilliance continues to unsettle us, once wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." This is not a comforting thought, but a haunting one. If true, it means that the moment we lose ourselves in constant company, we stop being fully ourselves. We dissolve into fragments of roles, son, daughter, colleague, partner, shadows of our authentic being. But why is solitude so closely tied to intelligence? The answer is not simple. When one withdraws from society, even temporarily, one is stripped of distractions. There is no external validation, no chorus of affirmations, no quick fixes for existential dread. In solitude, the mind turns inward. The questions we try to avoid by drowning them in noise come rushing back with merciless intensity. Who am I? What is the meaning of all this? Am I free, or merely repeating the patterns I inherited? To sit in silence is to be confronted by the terrifying weight of one's own consciousness. And yet, those who can endure it, those who not only endure but embrace it, develop an intelligence that is not merely academic or technical but existential. They cultivate the ability to stand apart from the herd, to think without the invisible hand of collective opinion guiding them. Their solitude breeds independence. Independence sharpens clarity. Clarity becomes insight, and insight, when pursued relentlessly, becomes wisdom. Still, there is danger here. Solitude is not easy. It is not peaceful in the beginning. For the average person, prolonged isolation feels like suffocation. It brings to the surface every insecurity, every hidden anxiety, every unbearable doubt. To endure solitude requires strength of mind and spirit. It requires the willingness to lose the comforting illusion that happiness is simply a matter of belonging. The intelligence of the solitary, then, is terrifying because it emerges from pain. It emerges from confrontation with truths that most people never dare to look at. Those who are always surrounded by others are buffered from these truths by distraction. But the solitary person strips away the buffer. Alone, they wrestle with reality in its rawest form. Alone, they see through the illusions of society. Alone, they discover that much of what we chase, status, applause, companionship, are substitutes for an inner strength we are too afraid to cultivate. And this is where the first thread of our exploration begins. Solitude is not a withdrawal from life, but a deeper plunge into it. Those who choose to be alone are not rejecting humanity, but facing it more honestly than anyone else dares to. From here, the question unfolds with sharper urgency. What kind of mind dares to live with such clarity, and what kind of truths can only be seen in isolation? To be alone is not merely to be without company. It is to stand unshielded before the abyss of your own inner world. The average person, cushioned by the constant hum of interaction, never has to face the terrifying silence of their own thoughts for long. But those who choose solitude step deliberately into this void. They trade the comfort of distraction for the rawness of unmediated self-awareness. And once you enter this territory, there is no turning back unchanged. Psychologists have long noted that solitude magnifies the voice of the unconscious. Hidden fears, long-buried memories, and unarticulated desires rise to the surface when external noise is stripped away. What most people call loneliness is often this confrontation with the hidden self. The solitary individual, however, does not flee from these shadows. They study them, they listen, they endure the storm of inner voices until they begin to discern patterns within the chaos. This process is dangerous. Solitude can easily tilt into despair. For some, the silence becomes suffocating, leading to anxiety, depression, even madness. The line between profound insight and psychological collapse is razor-thin. Perhaps this is why society fears solitude so deeply. It is not just about being physically alone, but about being trapped with the most relentless and inescapable presence, your own mind. And yet, those who emerge from this confrontation are transformed. Their intelligence acquires a depth that is not measured by grades or achievements, but by resilience. They have wrestled with themselves and survived. They have seen how fragile the human psyche can be, and in that recognition, they acquire a rare kind of humility. They no longer chase the illusions of permanence or stability. Instead, they learn to stand in the shifting sands of existence without grasping desperately for anchors. This is why the solitary mind often appears unsettling to others. They radiate an independence that cannot be tamed by peer pressure, advertising, or convention. Their decisions are guided by an internal compass, not by the herd. And society, built upon conformity, finds this deeply threatening. For how can you control someone who has already faced the abyss within and found the strength to live on their own terms? Consider Friedrich Nietzsche's reflection. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will often be lonely and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Here, solitude becomes not a punishment, but a privilege, a costly, grueling, yet ultimately liberating privilege. But this privilege demands sacrifice. To be truly alone is to strip away not only external company, but also the psychological crutches we use to avoid ourselves. No endless scrolling, no numbing entertainment, no endless validation seeking. Pure solitude forces you to ask, who am I without all this? What remains when there is nothing left to perform for? This is where the terrifying intelligence begins to crystallize. Those who remain in solitude long enough learn to distinguish between needs and illusions. They see clearly how much of what society calls success is a form of collective hypnosis. They sense how easily human beings cling to the familiar, not because it is true or meaningful, but because it is comfortable. And so, the solitary thinker becomes both an insider and an outsider. They live within society, but they no longer fully belong to it. Their vision extends beyond the narrow frame of the group. This vision, however, comes at a cost. Isolation is not just a physical state, but a psychological exile. The solitary mind learns to carry truths that others are unwilling to face. They learn to walk silently among the crowd, knowing they will never entirely fit in. Here lies the paradox. Solitude both wounds and heals. It strips you bare, but in that stripping, it makes you whole. Terrifies, but it also clarifies. And those who endure it become not just intelligent in the academic sense, but in the existential sense. They see what others cannot, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. But if solitude exposes the illusions of society, what are these illusions? What truths about the human condition become visible only when one dares to walk away from the crowd? This is the path we must follow next, into the unsettling recognition that society itself may not always be the cure for loneliness, but its greatest cause. When you step away from society, the first thing you notice is how loud it truly is. Not just in the literal sense, the endless chatter, the constant notifications, the blaring advertisements, but in the psychological sense. Society whispers incessantly about who you should be, what you should want, and how you should measure your worth. From childhood onward, we are wrapped in this fabric of expectations until we forget that it is not the world itself, but a carefully woven illusion. Solitude is the knife that cuts through this fabric. Alone, away from the reinforcing eyes of others, you begin to see how much of your identity has been borrowed. The career you chase, the lifestyle you envy, the ideals you proclaim as your own, all are, in some measure, inherited from the crowd. It is an unsettling realization, one that can feel like the collapse of the self. If so much of who I am has been dictated by society, then who am I really? This is why solitude is feared. It doesn't just isolate you from others, it strips you of illusions that once gave you comfort. You begin to see how status is a game of symbols, how trends are cycles of manufactured desire, how even morality is often a tool of conformity. Alone, these truths become unbearable for many, but liberating for the few who dare to accept them. Schopenhauer was merciless in his assessment of society. He observed how much of human interaction is driven not by genuine connection, but by vanity and competition. In his words, almost all of our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people. It is not solitude that wounds us most, but the betrayals, rejections, and conflicts born from the relentless push and pull of social life. And yet, instead of questioning this dynamic, we cling tighter to the very crowd that generates our suffering. Why? Because the alternative is terrifying. To be truly alone is to carry the burden of self-definition. No applause, no criticism, only the silent demand that you decide for yourself what has value. Most prefer the comfort of imitation to the agony of authenticity. They would rather be told what to want than confront the abyss of freedom. But those who choose solitude take the harder road. They endure the collapse of borrowed identities. They dismantle the illusions piece by piece until only the raw, unadorned self remains. This dismantling does not make them detached from reality. It roots them deeper in it. They see clearly that society is not the arbiter of truth, but a stage of shifting roles. Once you know this, you can step on and off the stage as you please. You are no longer enslaved by it. This freedom is double-edged. On one hand, it brings peace. The solitary person no longer feels compelled to measure themselves against the yardsticks of others. On the other hand, it brings estrangement. Once you see the illusion, it becomes difficult to play along wholeheartedly. You laugh at the joke, nod at the rituals, but inside you know it is performance. You are both participant and observer, always a little apart. And here lies the terrifying intelligence of solitude. It grants vision at the price of belonging. It teaches you that the world people cling to so desperately is often a fragile construction. Most people cannot see it, or if they do, they quickly turn their eyes away. But the solitary mind has no such luxury. They are condemned, or perhaps blessed, to see the illusion for what it is. This is why society often misjudges the solitary as cold, arrogant, or antisocial. In reality, their distance is not born of disdain, but of clarity. They no longer expect from society what it cannot give. They know the applause is fleeting, the judgments arbitrary, the trends empty. And with this knowledge comes a quieter, more authentic kind of existence. But clarity is not enough. If solitude reveals the illusions of society, the next step is even more dangerous: to live with those truths without collapsing under their weight. What does it mean to carry such knowledge, day after day, in a world that thrives on forgetting? That is where solitude transforms into something more than survival. It becomes a form of mastery. The revelations of solitude can feel unbearable at first. When society's illusions collapse, when the scaffolding of borrowed identities falls away, the solitary person is left standing naked before the enormity of existence. Many falter at this threshold. Some retreat quickly, running back to the comfort of distraction, clinging to the crowd with newfound desperation. But there are others, fewer, rarer, who do not retreat. They remain in the silence, wounded but unbroken. It is these individuals who discover the alchemy of solitude, the ability to transform isolation into mastery. What does this mastery look like? It is not domination over others, nor the accumulation of power in the traditional sense. Rather, it is dominion over oneself. Solitude trains the mind to regulate its own storms. Without the constant crutch of external validation, the solitary learns to generate meaning from within. They no longer ask, "What do others think of me?" but instead, "What do I truly think of myself?" This shift, though subtle, is revolutionary. In the beginning, solitude feels like deprivation. No applause, no companionship, no recognition. But over time, it becomes liberation. The solitary learns to live with fewer illusions, to need less from others, to rely more on their own inner resources. They build a fortress not out of stone, but out of understanding of themselves, their desires, and the fragile nature of life itself. This fortress is not impermeable. Pain still enters, doubt still lingers, yet the solitary learns to weather these intrusions without collapse. They no longer seek constant escape. They confront suffering head-on, dissecting it, learning from it, allowing it to refine rather than destroy them. In this sense, solitude becomes not a retreat from life, but an apprenticeship in resilience. Michel de Montaigne, the French essayist who often withdrew into his tower of books, captured the spirit when he wrote, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. Belonging to oneself, this is the essence of solitude's mastery. It is the capacity to stand grounded in your own being, regardless of the noise around you." The solitary intelligence that emerges here is unsettling precisely because it is untamed. It owes allegiance to no tribe, no institution, no passing trend. Such a person can no longer be manipulated easily, for they have tasted the radical independence of the inner world. This independence radiates in ways others cannot quite explain but instinctively feel. It is the quiet authority of someone who does not need approval to validate their existence. But mastery does not mean detachment from life altogether. In fact, the solitary who has endured the silence often re-enters the world with sharper vision. They see relationships, work, art, and even love more clearly, not as absolute saviors, but as transient yet meaningful experiences. They can participate fully without being enslaved. They can love without clinging, work without blind ambition, and create without pandering. And yet, this return to the world is not always smooth. The solitary carries a kind of strangeness that others sense but rarely understand. Their calm can appear intimidating, their independence unsettling, their refusal to conform mistaken for arrogance. In truth, it is simply that they have traveled to a place most fear to go, and they have returned with truths most do not wish to hear. This is why the intelligence of solitude can be called terrifying. It disrupts the comfortable illusions of others. In the presence of someone who truly belongs to themselves, the borrowed identities of the crowd feel suddenly fragile. The solitary becomes a mirror, reflecting back the uncomfortable truth that most people are not as free as they pretend to be. But the mastery of solitude is not about superiority. It is about authenticity. It is the courage to live without masks, to face the chaos within, and to emerge with a self that is no longer entirely shaped by others. This authenticity is rare, and like all rare things, it unsettles those who encounter it. Still, the journey is not complete. If solitude is a form of mastery, then what lies beyond mastery? What happens when intelligence, sharpened by silence, begins to shape not only the solitary individual but also the way they see the fate of humanity itself? The final step is the most haunting of all. Solitude not just as a personal condition, but as a philosophical vision of existence. To understand the ultimate power of solitude, one must move beyond psychology, beyond society, even beyond mastery of the self. The solitary path does not end with personal peace. It culminates in a philosophical vision that redefines the very meaning of existence. For Schopenhauer, solitude was not just a practical necessity for the thinker, it was a window into the deepest truths of human life. What emerges in prolonged solitude is the recognition of life's raw condition, its suffering, its impermanence, its relentless striving. Deprived of the noise of the crowd, the solitary perceives with painful clarity that much of human existence is driven by blind will, the endless craving for more, the insatiable hunger that no achievement, no relationship, no possession can truly satisfy. Most people hide from this recognition by drowning themselves in social dramas and distractions. The solitary cannot. They are forced to stare into this abyss without flinching. And yet, from this dark vision arises a strange liberation. For when you see the world stripped of illusion, when you accept its inherent turbulence, you no longer need to cling so desperately to it. You can participate in life without being consumed by it. You can suffer without being destroyed, love without illusion, and work without slavery to endless desire. Solitude, in its most mature form, becomes not despair but transcendence. This is why the intelligence born of solitude is both terrifying and profound. It terrifies because it reveals the fragility of everything people hold dear. It shows that society's promises of lasting happiness are hollow, that much of what we chase is nothing more than a chase itself. But it is profound because it opens a doorway to freedom, not freedom in the political or social sense, but freedom from illusion. The solitary person becomes something like a wanderer at the edge of humanity, living within the world yet no longer fully bound by it. They still feel pain, still experience longing, still confront mortality, but their relationship to these experiences is transformed. They are not crushed by them, because they have already faced the silence and endured it. Their solitude has inoculated them against despair. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "The deepest experience of the creator is solitude. This insight extends beyond art. To create one's life authentically, to live it not as repetition of borrowed patterns but as an original response to existence, requires solitude. It is in silence that the individual carves meaning out of chaos, shaping a self that is not mere imitation but true creation." But this vision carries weight. The solitary intelligence often finds itself alienated, not by choice but by inevitability. To see the world differently is to live differently. The crowd may never fully understand, and the solitary must learn to accept this distance without resentment. It is the price of clarity. It is the burden of freedom. And yet, there is beauty here too. Solitude does not always end in isolation. It can also deepen connection. The solitary who has mastered themselves can love more genuinely, for they no longer love out of desperation or dependence. They can give more freely, for they no longer see others as tools for validation. In this way, solitude, once feared as the enemy of connection, becomes its highest form. The terrifying intelligence of those who choose to be alone, then, is not a weapon but a mirror. It reflects back to humanity the truths it would rather avoid, that belonging does not equal authenticity, that distraction does not equal fulfillment, that silence is not the absence of life but its most unfiltered presence. Schopenhauer's insight remains unsettling. Solitude is the price of authenticity. To be yourself fully, you must first endure being alone. The solitary mind stands as both warning and invitation, a warning of the pain that comes with tearing away illusions, and an invitation to discover the rarest kind of freedom, the freedom to belong at last to yourself. In the end, solitude is not about turning away from the world, but about seeing it as it truly is. To walk alone is to walk deeper. To walk deeper is to see more clearly. And to see clearly is to live with an intelligence that is both terrifying and luminous. An intelligence that belongs only to those who have had the courage to face the silence, and to find in it not emptiness, but truth.